The Vessel by Adam Nevill. Now, Adam Nevill is a writer I've been meaning to read for some time, and wouldn't it just be my luck that you out there, yes, you chose this book for the Read Along Book Club, our last one, in fact. And if you didn't happen to watch that series and you would like to read along with me in the past and hear my very detailed thoughts about the book, check out the card up in the corner of the screen. Little did I know that I'd already been exposed to Adam Nevill's work, not in the novel form, but in the film form, because he wrote a book called The Ritual, which became a Netflix film, which I watched, and I thoroughly enjoyed that one, except the ending. It kind of fell apart at the end, but overall, I had a good time with it. So needless to say, I was excited to get into this one. It's a short book. It's only about 150 pages. It's folk horror, which I'm very much into. But did this book become a direct-to-TV horror tale or a feature that grabs you and doesn't let go? So what is the hook? What is The Vessel about? Well, it's about a woman named Jess. She's a single mother with a young girl named Izzy. She's having a rough time. She has a very shitty ex who is abusive, and she just wants nothing more to take her daughter away to a better life. So she takes a job as a caretaker at this house, this old vicarage called the Nerthus House. And she is to take care of a woman with dementia who is allegedly suffering from dementia. But there's something strange about the house. Of course, this is a horror novel, right? There's always something strange about the house. There's these odd artifacts everywhere, and something isn't quite right with Flo, who is the old lady suffering from dementia. She becomes very close with Izzy, Jess's daughter, and as Jess digs deeper and the plot unfolds, what horrors unleash will test her sanity. All right, well, there is the pitch. Hope you liked it. What did I think? Well, let us begin with character. I would say character here is serviceable. It's not very deep, and that has a lot to do, honestly, with the voice. So this book, and I'll probably mention it multiple times because it's a very key part of this novel, it's told in the omniscient voice. If you don't know what the omniscient voice is, imagine if you never get into the head of a character. Now, I'm not talking about direct thoughts like italics that you read, like you're literally reading the thoughts of people, but as if you're observing them from the outside always. You're only seeing things and seeing things they may not see. So you could think of it like a camera in a film. But we have Jess. She's traumatized, right? She's abused. So we see these things. We just don't necessarily feel them because I don't feel like we ever get deep enough inner character. It could be that the book is just too short and we weren't given enough time, or it could be the voice. Now, I have read many short books or novellas that have had very compelling character work, so I don't think it's so much the length. It's probably more leaning into the way the story was told. But we also have her ex, Tony, who is exactly more or less what you'd think, right? He's a guy who's been in prison. He's trying to make everything right, but just below the surface, we can see his violence ready to leap out and cause even more harm than it already has. We also have Flo, and I think she's kind of more the most interesting character, honestly. This is the old woman who is suffering from dementia at the Nerthus House. We get her story from the things that Jess finds. So she's walking around this big house. She's finding all these strange artifacts, photos, notes, etc., etc. So she's learning the story of Flo, and I thought that was kind of a cool way for us to empathize with Flo to a degree, or at least understand who she was. Because we were in the position where we were obviously never in our head because of the way the story was told, but also because she was our main character. We also have some other side characters like Jess's boss, who we briefly meet. We have some of her co-workers or some of the women, the other caretakers that are coming to relieve her of her shift and just give her shit as well. So you can see that Jess is kind of attacked at all angles. Not only her ex, not only her predicament, but her co-workers and the very lady she is taking care of. So I did appreciate that aspect of the character, right? We had all of these forces on the protagonist, forcing them to act. But unfortunately, because of the way the story was told, the voice it was told in rather, we never truly felt for Jess. At least I didn't when I was reading it. All right, well, let us talk about the plot next. And I think it's important here as well to talk about the way the book was written. So very short chapters for the most part. And I absolutely loved it, right? Not only is this book short, like I said, only 150 pages, but the chapters were like 1 or 2 pages, most of them anyway. And it made reading this novel just feel like a breeze, right? It felt like it was moving along quickly. You were never bored. You got the dopamine hit every time you saw a new chapter come into play. But the strange thing is, Adam Nevill decided to create some very long chapters. Now, I think in a regular book, normally they wouldn't feel very long, but when they were right in the middle of these really short chapters, they kind of felt like a drag. And so I remember turning the pages as I was reading, wondering when I would hit that next chapter break. And I know that sounds weird, and I know it sounds like you should be wrapped up in the story and not so concerned about when you're going to hit the next chapter, but the pacing that he set early on, it just kind of did that to my subconscious, I guess. I wouldn't say I was literally waiting for the next chapter, but it's just something felt off. And I think you know what I mean if you've read a lot of books, and hopefully you have if you're checking out my channel. There's a lot to be said about the pace of a book and the pace of a plot with how you construct your chapters, how short they are, how long they are, how many scenes are in them. All right, well, I think I'm talking about the way the book was constructed too much, even though pacing and that fact go hand in hand. The story itself, it unfolds more or less what you'd expect, right? You've seen this horror movie before, and I'm not denigrating the story in any way like that, because sometimes the familiar is what we want. So we have Jess. She goes and gets this job at this creepy house. She starts to uncover things, right? We have somewhat of a curious protagonist, right? That's what you want here. She goes into this house and she witnesses all these odd things, not things jumping out at her, just strange things. Like I said, artifacts, or this weird mound of something in the center of the room. And she investigates all of these things, which reveal the plot to us. However, it was a little disappointing that we weren't given something more. Like, take the film Hereditary. It is very similar to this book in that it is a folk horror story. All kinds of zany stuff is going on throughout the movie, and you're wondering, where is this film going? What's happening? How are these things going to all connect together? At the very end, one of the main characters, discovers what is going on, right? She finds some documents, some books, some photos, and we as the audience witnessing this along with her, we have our aha moment. We see how everything connects. And that kind of happens here. Not quite. I feel like it could have been done better. We have Jess, who is investigating, and everything's revealed at the end. You more or less know what's going on. You don't know all the details of what's going on, which I kind of like, right? There's some really cool parts in this book that he could have shown more of, but he had some restraint, and I really appreciate that restraint from a visual standpoint, because for me, horror isn't so much about showing the monster. It's about hinting at the monster, right? That's what's scary, not really seeing it, because I think once you show a monster, I'm not saying there's a monster in this book, by the way, but once you show the quote unquote monster, everybody is going to visualize that in their own way if it's a novel. And some of us are going to be disappointed. Some of us may not have the imaginative capacity to create a very creepy picture. And so always showing the creature just a little bit, right? You get glimpses of it, you see it skitter away or whatever. And that's what's creepy, right? It's creepy that the monster is there and it's always there. And it's really what Lovecraft always said, right? The oldest, and I'm paraphrasing here, right? But the oldest and greatest fear is fear of the unknown. H.P. Lovecraft had it right. So the plot, while it does unfold in a satisfying way, you never feel like you're bogged down with anything, right? I know it's a short book, but the way it resolves, while everything is given to us, shown to us more or less, I feel like there's a few key things that are missing to make it a more compelling read. There's so many great hints to the lore of this story in the book, but it's never fully given to us. Now, I don't want everything given to us. I do want some things left to mystery, but I think in this case, which is odd for me to say this, but I wanted a little bit more lore. All right, well, let us talk about the writing itself, or as I like to call it, the cinematography of the novel. Well, like I said, it is very film-like. It's omniscient, right? It's not in the heads of the characters at all. So we're viewing this thing from afar. And like I said, we're also viewing things that the characters cannot see, right? So imagine you have a character in a room who is folding some clothes, or let's say getting ready for bed. There's a monster in the closet. This character's back is turned to the monster, but we can see the monster lurking in the closet, ready to climb out and pounce on the victim. Stuff like that. I'm sure you've seen plenty of horror movies that utilize that kind of technique. Now, while this technique is used a lot in films because of the medium itself, it's not my favorite technique in writing, because I prefer more of a character-centric story where we're, experiencing the world through their eyes, right? Because again, that is the strength of writing. And on another note, this book feels a little overwritten for my taste. There's some strange language used. I don't want to call it flowery, just overwritten, right? A lot of adjectives, a lot of adverbs, over describing things, getting almost a little bit too clever with the similes and metaphors to where you're wondering, it almost stands out off the page. You're wondering if there is a purpose to this writing. And coming from someone who has read the entire novel, I will tell you, I did not gather any kind of meaningful reason to write the book in this way. And it's kind of disjointed. Sometimes it's there, Sometimes it's not. It's very similar to how the chapters were constructed. We had some really short ones. I would say they're mostly very short. And then we had some really long ones. There are also times where he really leaned into the omniscient stuff, which is kind of what I was saying, the example I gave where the monster's in the closet. The hero doesn't know that, but we know that as the viewer. But he did it so few and far between that it felt uneven, again, just like the writing. But it's not terrible by any stretch. It's serviceable. These are just kind of nitpicks that I noticed that kind of stood out to me. And I think one thing you don't really want to have is the writing itself stand out too much. And I've been guilty of that myself, but it's not terrible. It's totally serviceable. I don't think it's going to get in the way of most people, which is why I'm going to give The Vessel by Adam Nevill a 5 out of 10. A quickly paced horror novel that unfortunately doesn't really surprise you or creep you out very much. There's a couple of creepy images here. Serviceable character work, but shallow, unfortunately. And an ending that just needed a little bit more. But I'm still eager to read more of Adam Nevill's work because this novel was very unique, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But if you don't want to hang out for that, thank you for hanging out with me and watching the video. If you would like to check my own work, my own writing, you can check out the link in the description, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. All right, you spoilery folk. Don't say I didn't warn you. I'm going to spoil some things here. Remember, it's not about plot, it's not about character, but the author's note at the very end. So, Adam Nevill, he has written screenplays, yes. At the very end of this book, in the author's note, he goes into a lot of detail about how he learned screenwriting because he got these movie deals, which, I mean, how great is that, right? Everybody wants that. That's every writer's dream. So he said it was almost like learning to write again. It was a very different format, very different style, very different rules, and he struggled with it. But during this education, he thought, what if I wrote a novel that was like a film? Like exactly like a film, meaning you never get in the character's head, with the exception of one time. I believe in this novel there's one interior thought piece or flashback, but other than that, nothing at all. So it is not new to write a book in omniscient. Plenty of writers do. Cormac McCarthy does it all the time, but it was done here different. And when you read this book, if you read this book, you will see what I mean. There is more emphasis on the quote unquote camera work, how the camera is moving through the scene, where the characters are, what they see, what they don't see, which is ultimately what we see all the time. And so he wrote this book in a very screenwriterly sort of way, where he never wanted to get in the heads of the character. He wanted to utilize the camera. He wanted to just report, right? Just report what the camera is seeing and nothing else. And I believe he said that he wrote this as a film first and then turned it into a novel, which makes a lot of sense because when you read this, the writing style, as I mentioned, stands out quite a bit, just like a film. Some people may like that. I didn't really care for it. I feel like it was a bit of a failed experiment. And he does mention that, and I will always give people credit when they try something new. And here, Adam Nevill is trying something new. I don't feel like it worked personally for me. It may work for other people. But the cool thing is he was trying something different. He wasn't just writing the same old book. He was asking questions. He was learning new things about screenwriting. And he's like, what if I applied this to prose writing? How would that look? And so that is what The Vessel is. A novel coming from a screenplay. So the absolute inverse of what you normally see. And I really feel like that is the problem because movies have their strengths and weaknesses. Novels have their strengths and weaknesses. Like I said earlier in the review, films allow you to see other things that the characters might not see because we can never get in their head. The only real POV shots you get are when you're kind of over the shoulder, you're witnessing something as the POV character is, or you turn the camera around and you see them emote on screen, right? That you can kind of get in their heads a little bit. You don't know exactly what they're thinking, but hopefully the talent on screen is conveying those emotions to where you do understand. Whereas novels, you can literally do anything you want. You can get as deep into the head of the POV character as you wish, or you could float around like a camera. I'm looking at you, Frank Herbert, and head hop into every single character and divulge all of their desires, all of their motivations. But anyway, that is the spoilery section. I don't really think it's much of a spoiler, but I didn't want to ruin it for you in case you wanted to go into this thing completely blind with the exception of what I've described to you already. Because maybe if you would have known this was a film first or a screenplay first or intended to be a film, it might have had you view this book in an entirely different light. And I don't want to be that guy to spoil it for you. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you read this book? Were you looking forward to it? And if you've made it this far, man, what a trooper. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.